I didn't find my door unlocked. I found the latch physically broke in the wood, splintered inward like someone had been desperate to get inside. And standing in the center of my foyer, surrounded by the dust of a 100-year-old renovation, were my parents. They weren't holding housewarming gifts. They were holding a manila envelope. My father, Richard, looked at the exposed brick with a sneer, while my mother, Lisa, just stared at me with that familiar, suffocating disappointment. Before I could ask why they had broken into my house, a man in a cheap suit stepped out from my kitchen. A process server. He handed me the papers without a word. I looked down. Familial opportunity cost. That was the legal term. But the translation was simpler. They were suing me for the down payment I had just put on this house. They claimed that money my life savings belonged to the family pot, specifically to fund my brother Austin's new crypto venture. They weren't just trespassing. They were trying to evict me from my own life. Before we dive deeper into this nightmare, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't scream. I didn't throw them out. I just walked past them down the narrow stairs to the basement workshop and turned on the belt sander. The noise was deafening, a mechanical roar that drowned out their shouting upstairs. I pressed a piece of rough walnut against the grit until my arms shook, watching the years of grime turn into dust. For 25 years, I wasn't a daughter. I was an insurance policy, a safety net woven out of silence and overtime. My parents, Lisa and Richard, had a very specific business model for our family. My brother Austin was the venture capital project, high risk, zero return. I was the steady bond yield. At 16, I was paying the water bill so Richard didn't have to dip into his networking fund. At 20, I covered the property taxes while Austin got a semester abroad in Barcelona that was really just a 4-month bar crawl. I stopped sanding the silence, rushing back in like a physical weight. Looking at the sawdust covering my hands, I finally understood why I had stayed for so long. For years, people told me I was a pushover. They were wrong. I was an addict. My drug of choice was hope. I thought if I just wrote one more check, if I fixed one more crisis, if I smoothed over one more of Austin's disasters, the balance would finally tip in my favor. I thought love was something you could purchase on an installment plan. I believed that if I paid enough into the family pot, eventually I would earn the right to be seen. It wasn't kindness. It was a transaction I was losing every single day. That's why I started the warehouse job. It was a dusty, cavernous distribution center on the edge of the Steel City, miles away from the image my parents tried to project. I worked graveyard shifts moving crates that weighed more than I did breathing in diesel fumes and cardboard dust. I restored furniture in the daylight hours, finding broken things and making them strong again, selling them to people who understood the value of solid wood. Every single dollar went into a separate digital bank account I named Freedom. Not a savings account. An escape hatch. $14,500. It took me 4 years to scrape that together. 4 years of eating rice, wearing thrift store boots, and lying to my parents about my income. I didn't buy this house to invest in real estate. I bought it to build a wall. I looked at the legal notice sitting on my workbench, the paper already curling in the humidity. Familial opportunity cost. They weren't suing me because they needed the money. They were suing me because I had dared to close my wallet. They had looked at my life, my sweat, my sleepless nights, and decided it was an asset they were entitled to liquidate. I wiped the dust from my hands. The shaking had stopped. The addiction was broken. I wasn't waiting for them to love me anymore. I was waiting for them to realize they had just declared war on the only person who knew where all the financial bodies were buried. The escalation didn't come with a shout. It came with a vibration in my pocket 3 days later. I was at the warehouse stacking pallets of raw oak when my phone lit up. It was a text from Austin. No, hello, no apology for the lawsuit. Just a picture. It was a screenshot of a crypto wallet showing a zero balance, followed by a message. Hope you're happy hoarding all that equity. Some of us are trying to actually build wealth. I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was the timestamp that chilled me. He had sent it 10 minutes ago. I wasn't at home. I was at work. And my house, my renovation site, was empty. I clocked out early. I didn't speed. I drove with a precise, terrifying calm, the kind that settles in your stomach when you know the disaster has already happened. When I pulled into the alley behind my row house, the back door to the basement workshop wasn't kicked in. The heavy padlock on the storm cellar doors had been cut, cleanly. With bolt cutters, I walked down the concrete steps. The smell of sawdust was gone, replaced by the damp metallic scent of violation. My workbench was untouched. The table saw was still there. But in the corner under the heavy canvas tarp I kept tucked away from the dust, there was nothing but a square of clean concrete. Grandpa George's tool chest was gone. It wasn't just a box. It was a 300-pound handcrafted maple chest filled with planes, chisels, and saws that George had used for 50 years. He had taught me how to sharpen the blades until they could split a hair. He had left it to me specifically bypassing my father. Bypassing Austin. Because he knew I was the only one who would use them to create, not just consume. My phone rang. It was my mother, Lisa. I answered, not saying a word. "Lauren," she said, her voice tight, defensive. "Austin told us he stopped by. Don't overreact." "He stole the chest," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat metallic. "He didn't steal it," she snapped. "He liquidated a dormant asset. Those tools were just sitting there gathering dust while your brother had a guaranteed investment opportunity." "He needed the capital, Lauren. $5,500, that's the buy-in. You weren't using them." I looked at the empty space on the floor. They didn't see my livelihood. They didn't see my heritage. They saw a pawn ticket. To them, my work wasn't a career. It was a hobby that was occupying space that could be monetized for Austin. "He sold Grandpa's legacy for a coin launch," I stated. It wasn't a question. "He invested in the family's future," Richard's voice chimed in from the background. "And since you refused to contribute your fair share with the house money, he did what he had to do. We're a team, Lauren. Start acting like it." I hung up. I didn't slam the phone. I simply pressed the red button. I stood in the silence of my looted workshop and felt the last tether snap. For years I had treated them like a burden I had to carry. I realize now they weren't a burden. They were termites. They wouldn't stop eating until the whole structure came down. I wasn't going to call the police. The police would call it a civil dispute. I wasn't going to beg for the tools back. That was the old Lauren. The new Lauren looked at the empty concrete square and realized that if they wanted to talk about family assets, we needed to have a comprehensive audit. I walked back upstairs, opened my laptop, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Andrew. The only person I knew who hated my brother as much as I did, and who just happened to be the sharpest magistrate in the county. I didn't reply to the text about the tools. I didn't drive to my parents' house to scream at them. That would have given them the satisfaction of an emotional reaction, and I was done paying them in emotions. Instead, I drove to a small brick office building on the south side. Andrew was already waiting. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since we were apprentices fighting over the best chisels in the guild workshop. He had traded his work boots for a law degree and a magistrate's appointment, but he still had the eyes of a craftsman, someone who looked for the cracks in the foundation. He didn't offer me coffee. He just held out a hand for the lawsuit papers. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of pages turning. I watched his face. I expected him to laugh at the absurdity of it. Instead, his expression grew colder with every paragraph. "Constructive trust," he said finally, tossing the file onto his desk. "That's their angle." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they are arguing that because you lived under their roof while you were saving that money, your labor was implicitly part of the family corporation. They're claiming your freedom fund wasn't personal savings. It was embezzled family assets. They aren't just saying you owe them rent, Lauren. They're claiming they own you. They're claiming your autonomy is a breach of contract." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the legal translation of every guilt trip, every sigh, every "we sacrificed for you" speech I had ever heard. They had weaponized their entitlement into a legal theory. "Can they win?" I asked. "It's flimsy," Andrew said, leaning back. "But it's dangerous. If they get a sympathetic judge or if they drag this out, they could freeze your assets for months. They want to bleed you until you hand over the deed just to stop the legal fees." He turned to his computer. "But there's something here that doesn't track. In the discovery request, they listed a liability I've never seen. A $60,000 lien against their property that they claim you agreed to service." I frowned. I never agreed to service any lien. I paid the water bill and the taxes. Andrew started typing, his eyes scanning the county clerk's digital records. "Lauren, did you sign any loan documents in 2019? Maybe a co-sign for a renovation or a consolidation loan?" "No. I was 19. I didn't sign anything." Andrew stopped typing. He turned the monitor toward me. On the screen was a PDF of a home equity line of credit document dated 4 years ago. It was taken out against my parents' house. And there at the bottom, next to Richard and Lisa's signatures, was a scrawl that looked terrifyingly familiar. It was my name. But it wasn't my signature. The loop on the L was too wide. The slant was wrong. It was the handwriting of someone who had practiced my signature just enough to fool a board notary, but not enough to fool a forensic analysis. They didn't just steal your labor, Andrew said, his voice low and dangerous. They stole your identity. They took out a second mortgage in your name to fund Austin's lifestyle, and now that the interest rates have spiked and the balloon payment is due, they're trying to seize your new house to pay it off before they get caught. I stared at the screen. The anger I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. This wasn't a civil dispute. This wasn't a family spat. My parents were fraudsters. They had mortgaged a future I hadn't even built yet. They aren't trying to take my house because they think it's theirs, I whispered. They're trying to take it because they're drowning. Andrew looked at me. This changes everything. This isn't defense anymore, Lauren. This is a felony. What do you want to do? I looked at the forged signature. I thought about the tools Austin had sold. I thought about the nights I spent breathing warehouse dust while they spent my credit. I don't want to settle, I said. I want to go to court. And I want you to let them talk. The courtroom didn't smell like justice. It smelled like floor wax and anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Andrew, my hands folded on top of the dossier that contained the proof of my own erasure. Across the aisle, my parents Lisa and Richard were staging a masterclass in victimhood. They had dressed the part perfectly. Lisa was wearing a cardigan I hadn't seen in years, something soft and frayed that whispered struggling mother. Richard wore a suit that was just ill-fitting enough to suggest humility. And Austin sat between them, slumped low, looking less like a crypto bro who had pawned my livelihood and more like a misunderstood youth crushed by the weight of the world. When the hearing began, their lawyer, a slick, expensive man named Mr. Sterling, who, clearly charged by the minute, launched into his opening statement. It was a work of fiction so elaborate, it almost commanded respect. He painted a picture of a loving, collaborative family unit where resources were pooled for the greater good. He described my freedom fund not as wages earned from sweating in a warehouse, but as a family trust I had siphoned off while living rent-free. Then Lisa took the stand. She cried on cue. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue and looked at the judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway, and said, "We just wanted to help our children build a future. We trusted Lauren with the family savings because we thought she was responsible. We didn't know she was unstable. Unstable. That was their new angle. They claimed I had stolen the money from a hidden cash stash Grandpa George supposedly kept in the basement, a stash that never existed, and that my obsession with the house was a manic episode. I watched them perform, and for a moment the old anger flared up, but then Andrew touched my arm, grounding me. I looked at them again, really looked at them, and the anger dissolved into something colder, understanding. This wasn't about the money. It never is with people like them. It was about the delusion of the empty wallet. Psychologists call it a narcissistic injury. To my parents, my independence wasn't just a lifestyle choice. It was a theft. In their minds, I existed solely as an extension of their needs. I was the appliance that kept the lights on. By buying my own house, by creating wealth they couldn't access, I hadn't just moved out. I had broken the hierarchy. They weren't furious because they were broke. They were furious because I was sovereign. They couldn't survive the reality that the person they treated as a servant had surpassed them. My success was a mirror reflecting their own mediocrity, and they were willing to burn the whole world down just to shatter it. The judge called a 15-minute recess to review the submitted financial evidences. "Court is in recess," she said, banging the gavel. "Counselors. Chambers. Everyone else remain seated or step into the hall." Judge Holloway left the bench. Andrew stood up to stretch. "Mr. Sterling," my parents' lawyer, looked at his phone, frowned, and signaled for Richard and Lisa to follow him into the small conference antechamber attached to the courtroom. They closed the door, but they didn't check the technology. The courtroom was equipped with a modern audio system for remote transcription. There was a wireless microphone sitting on the defense table, the one Mr. Sterling had been using. He had picked it up to move his papers, set it down on his stack of files, and walked into the side room. But he hadn't muted the receiver. The room was quiet, filled only with the low murmur of the clerk typing. Then suddenly a voice boomed through the overhead speakers, clear and distorted by rage. "You lied to me, Richard." It was Mr. Sterling. Every head in the courtroom snapped up. The stenographer stopped typing. Austin froze his phone halfway to his face. I didn't lie, my father's voice crackled back, sounding smaller, whiny. I said she agreed to it. You said she signed it, Sterling screamed, the audio peaking with a sharp screech of feedback. I am looking at the handwriting analysis the plaintiff just submitted. That is not her signature on the loan documents. That is a forgery, and it's a bad one. The courtroom went deathly silent. It was the kind of silence that feels like a vacuum sucking the air out of your lungs. We had to do it, Lisa's voice drifted through high and frantic. The balloon payment is due next month. If we don't get her deed, we lose the house. We lose everything. You have to fix this. Just tell the judge she's lying. Fix it, Sterling's laugh was a harsh barking sound. You want me to suborn perjury for a fraud you committed 4 years ago. I am not losing my license for your grift. You told me the money was family assets. You didn't tell me you mortgaged her identity. I looked at Andrew. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at the speaker with the intense focus of a predator watching prey stumble off a cliff. Shut up, Richard, Sterling yelled again. We are done. I am walking out that door and I am going straight to the Bar Association to cover my own ass before the district attorney gets here. The door to the antechamber flew open. Mr. Sterling stormed out, his face purple. He stopped dead when he saw the entire courtroom, the bailiff, the clerk, the dozen people in the gallery, and me staring at him. He looked at the microphone sitting on the table. The little red light still blinking steady and bright. Behind him, my parents stood in the doorway. They looked at the room, they looked at the speaker, and for the first time in my life I saw the mask slip completely. There was no golden glow, no righteous indignation, just 2 terrified con artists who had finally run out of road. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Mr. Sterling didn't even look at his clients. He walked straight to the bench, his voice shaking with the kind of professional terror that only comes when a lawyer realizes he almost became an accessory to a felony. Your Honor, he said, I must motion to withdraw as counsel immediately. I can no longer represent these clients ethically. Judge Holloway didn't blink. Granted, she said. Her gaze shifted to Richard and Lisa, who were standing by the door like statues made of ash. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am instructing the bailiff to secure the audio recording of the last 10 minutes. I will be forwarding a transcript and the exhibits of forgery to the district attorney's office for review. You aren't leaving this courthouse with a deed. You are leaving with a criminal investigation. Richard slumped against the doorframe. Lisa made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. But Andrew wasn't done. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a calm, lethal precision. Your Honor, he said. Given the admission of fraud regarding the second mortgage and the theft of personal property, we move for summary judgment on our cross-complaint. We are asking for immediate restitution. Since they had no lawyer and since their own attorney had just screamed their guilt into the public record, there was no defense. The gavel came down like a guillotine. Judgment for the defendant. Full damages awarded. We walked out of the courtroom 10 minutes later. The hallway was bright, flooded with the afternoon sun that felt cleaner than the air inside. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. It was the weightlessness of a burden finally being set down. We made it to the courthouse steps before they caught up to us. Lauren. It was Lisa. She was running her heels, clicking frantically on the concrete. Richard trailed behind her, looking old and gray. When she reached me, she didn't scream. She opened her arms. She tried to hug me. We were desperate, she sobbed, reaching for my hands. We didn't want to hurt you. The bank was calling every day. We're family, Lauren. We just need time. Please tell the judge it was a misunderstanding. I stepped back. Her hands grasped at empty air. I looked at this woman, the woman who had charged me for water usage, who had forged my name to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford, who had sued me for building a life she couldn't control. I didn't see a mother. I saw a stranger who owed me a lot of money. I reached into Andrew's briefcase and pulled out the document the clerk had just stamped. I'm not telling the judge anything I said. My voice was steady. But you should read this. Lisa took the paper, her hands trembling. What is it? It's a lien, I said. The court just awarded me damages for the fraudulent mortgage and the stolen tools. Since you don't have the cash to pay me, the judgment attaches to your property. Richard stepped forward, his eyes widening as he read the legal text over her shoulder. You put a lien on our house. It's not really your house anymore, I corrected him. It's the collateral for the debt you owe me. If you try to sell it, I get paid first. If you don't pay me, I can force a sale. I watched the realization hit them. They had walked in here trying to steal my home to cover their mistakes. They were walking out, having handed me the keys to theirs. "You wanted my house?" I asked, looking them dead in the eye. "Now I own yours." I turned my back on them and walked down the steps. I didn't look back at their tears. I didn't listen to their pleas. I had a renovation to finish. I didn't go home immediately. I drove to the pawn shop on the edge of town where Austin had dumped my history for a quick payday. The chest was still there, sitting in the back corner under a layer of fluorescent dust. The owner knew exactly what he had. He tried to haggle, tried to tell me about the craftsmanship as if I didn't know every scratch on the lid. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I paid him triple what he gave Austin. I didn't pay for the wood. I paid for the right to take back the only thing in my life that hadn't been corrupted by my family's greed. Back in my living room with the evening sun hitting the exposed brick, and Buster, my golden retriever, snoring softly on the rug, I started to clean it. I rubbed linseed oil into the maple, smelling the scent of my childhood workshop. As I was wiping down the bottom drawer, my cloth caught on a raised edge. I frowned. Grandpa George's joinery was perfect. He never left rough edges. I pressed on the wood. It clicked. A false bottom popped up, revealing a shallow compartment I had never noticed in 20 years. Inside there was a heavy canvas pouch and a letter. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a legal document. It was a handwritten note, dated 3 weeks before he died. "Lauren," it read, "if you're reading this, they finally pushed you too far. I know they will. Your father has a hole in his pocket where his soul should be, and your brother inherited the shovel. I couldn't leave you money in the will, they would have fought you for it, so I'm leaving it here in the work. Use this to build something they can't touch. Don't look back. You were never the servant little bird. You were the watchman. And now your watch is ended." I opened the canvas pouch. Inside were 20 gold coins, the real inheritance. He had hidden them in the one place he knew my father and Austin would never look, inside the tools of hard labor. I sat on the floor and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of sheer overwhelming validation. For years I thought I was crazy. I thought I was selfish for wanting to keep my own money, for wanting boundaries. But George had seen it. He had seen the dynamic clearly, and he had prepared me for the escape. I realized then that my independence wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a reaction to trauma. It was a legacy. My parents tried to call a few times after the lien was filed. I didn't block them. I just didn't answer. I let it ring, listening to the silence of my house, enjoying the peace of a bill paid in full. They eventually lost their house. The lien, combined with their other debts, forced a sale. I heard they moved into a small apartment across town. Austin moved in with them. They're still a family, I suppose. A family bound together by the consequences of their own entitlement. But I built a different kind of family. I finished the renovation. I filled the house with furniture I restored with my own hands. I built a life that is quiet, solid, and entirely mine. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you frame, insulate, and roof. It's structural. And once you build it with your own sweat, no one, not your parents, not your guilt, not the ghosts of what you thought you owed them, can tear it down. If you've ever had to build your peace from the wreckage of someone else's expectations, share this story. Let's remind the world that we are the architects of our own freedom.